Well, we're back again. We're here with Adam Flater of Universal Mind. We got James Ward, of course, and John Rose. We're going to chat about, I think, Flex and Air and your open source project. And we just went over how to say this, but I don't want to blow it, so.
Merapi.
Okay.
Merapi.
And we're not even sure that's right because it's named after a volcano on
that's
Java.
right. Yep.
So, anyway.
So maybe we should start out a little bit about just you. Like, what do you do? Where'd you come from? Like, which planet?
And not your parents.
Right.
Well, I came from, thanks for the beer, by the way, guys.
Yes.
These guys, if you ever get a chance, good beer.
Absolutely. That's what we're
Or
about.
the alcohol of your choice, depending on
That's
how
right.
interested you
We
are.
do scotch sometimes.
Oh, see, I'll have to come back.
Okay, we can do that.
Part 2.
So yeah, I came from a corn farm in Iowa, actually.
Wow.
Wow.
I have a computer science background and did Java development and some Microsoft stuff.
Nice.
And then I got into Flex in October of 2005, so like beta 2
Okay.
time.
Cool.
And never looked back.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
So you've been doing Flex development and having fun, and you actually build like real production
Yeah,
stuff with it, right?
every day.
Unlike me, where I always
Real
have to be
production.
honest, I'm an
Yeah.
evangelist, I build demos and,
Oh, right, gotcha.
and don't even unit test. So you
Yeah.
actually build real stuff.
Yeah, I came on with Effective UI just after they had started working on the eBay desktop app. So that was actually one of the first, as a consultant, that was one of the first Flex apps that,
Very nice.
large scale ones. And then I've worked on Market Replay and
The NASDAQ one.
the NASDAQ app.
Yeah, that one's been getting brave reviews from what I heard.
Yeah, that team is doing great with it. It's a great use of Flex, Air, cloud computing.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy for them, and it's a software as a service model.
Yeah,
for
definitely.
them. So
Very cool. Good. So tell us a little about Merapi. What is that Merapi thing?
phone. Sorry, my phone's going off.
No worries.
Merapi is
We're all
a
tech geeks. All have phones.
right. Merapi is a framework for bridging Java and Flex at the desktop. So don't think server-side code. It's Java code that runs at the desktop and is made accessible to a Flex process. So,
Right.
which could be Air. And it started out only Air, but it can be the browser too.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. A lot of people are surprised by that.
Yeah.
I guess we don't publicize it enough. So
Well,
it
I
can,
knew it was theoretically possible, but
yeah.
I think we talked about a while back how it's kind of scary, right?
It is a little scary, right? But it's basically the same kind of architecture as Google Gears.
So I was
Right.
just gonna
As
ask.
long as we put the right security around it, right?
Yeah, unlike Google Gears, which
Right.
allegedly just had some
Right,
vulnerabilities.
some holes, yeah. So yeah, there's a Google Gears-like model for the browser, which right now is just Flex, but it could be potentially Flash or even Ajax with a little
Right.
Swift. But the point is that we can transmit object data from Java to Flex using AMF. So we can deal with the data as typed objects and not have to worry about messy XML.
That's great.
Kind of stuff.
So, and you guys used the Blaze.ds AMF libraries to do that? Is that
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. Good.
Yeah.
That's great. And Blaze is like LGPL 3 or something?
Right.
Was that a problem? I know some people have not chosen not to use Blaze.ds's libraries because of the licensing considerations around that, or
Well, I haven't gotten sued yet.
okay.
So no, I read over, and as far as I know, LGPL, as long as you take the pieces and you're not,
Right.
you're giving
More friendly
credit,
to
giving the
linking
license. Yeah, and that's what we did.
Right.
We are including the specific jars that
And
contain.
you're not modifying.
We're not modifying.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm, as far as I know, we're we're doing the right
compliance.
thing.
Cool. Good.
Yeah, in compliance.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm glad that you're able to use those libraries. I mean, I think that that's
Right.
really what they're intended for, is not just to create a product for Blaze.ds,
Right, yeah.
but to allow other people to use those same libraries to do their own thing, like
Yeah,
Merapi
and there's other projects. I don't know if you're aware of Flex Server Lib.
right.
There's some guys doing that,
Right,
like
yeah.
server library, like Flex Lib for
the DP Hibernate.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's more of an extension of Blaze, but still, it's in the same, building on what Blaze has brought
Right.
us.
What does it mean to use Merapi? Am I doing 2 installs on the client, or do I lose that niceness of just, the Air app and going, or is there
So,
a way
yeah.
to package those together?
That's kind of the number one most important question that we
Yeah.
usually get asked, right? And it's something that we've only started playing with, and I've prototyped a solution that involves more or less a Java installer that will install both the
Okay.
Oh, cool.
the Java process.
Right,
So
right.
you kind of
Yeah.
leave the standard AIR install experience and take
Well-
more from the other side?
No. So what I do is I install the Java app as a native, either exe or Mac, .app
Yeah.
folder, and then on first starter at the end of that install, whatever way you configure it, then it will run the AIR installer. So if you have an AIR file that you want to push changes down to and still use the Adobe install process, you can do that. You don't start it out from a badge like
Yeah,
AIR does
sure.
on a site, but
It's a custom installer.
it's a custom installer, but you don't need to package the runtime. You don't need to get a license for that.
Right.
If the user already has it installed.
Yeah,
Or
right.
if you direct them to install it from a Adobe
Gotcha.
site.
Right.
So it's a way to kind of be like, I personally like their install
Yeah.
model and process for AIR. And if I was building a production app, I'd like to probably use it and not hack around it.
Well, it seems like I think this is actually, maybe we should start with this. What are the interesting use cases for Merapi for like
Right.
real world apps?
Yeah, so some of the demos, and my blog, I'm sure it'll be in the notes or whatever, adamflater.net, as well as merapiproject.net. You'll see a lot of demos there using RFID hardware,
Right.
Lego Mindstorm robots controlled through Bluetooth.
Nice.
Which is kind of the most popular one at conferences
Well,
and
it's fun.
such. I should have brought the robot with me.
Well, point them to your blog because you have videos, right?
I do have videos
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
But other things like language constructs, we can do threads in Java.
Right.
To do, let's say you have, like the NASDAQ app, for example,
Right.
parses the data in CSV. That's really, it's
really
trading data,
expensive,
so
yeah.
it can be really large
Right.
data sets and expensive. You could, pass that over to Java,
Yeah.
stick it in a thread, have that be parsed to AMF objects
Right.
and sent back.
Right.
And there's still some overhead in decoding the AMF.
Are you using it on NASDAQ?
No, I'm not on that project anymore.
Okay.
So I was a consultant for them.
Gotcha.
And it's an internal effort.
Yeah, that's pure AIR though, right?
It is.
Flex.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's pure. Yep.
Interesting.
Cool. So, so it sounds like in a lot of those environments, the install process isn't really a big deal because it's in like internet controlled environments where the IT is like rolling out the software to all their desktops. I mean, I'm sure that that's
Right.
not 100% the case, but
In those cases, then it's not such a big deal.
Right.
Right. And then the kind of gears approach makes more sense.
right.
But for a consumer to have that open,
How does it in the Gears approach? You're still installing a native desktop app?
yeah, it's more like a service in that
Yeah.
case.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
it needs to be running if your browser app wants to use it.
Yep.
But
It's
if-
interesting.
it's-
Totally fascinated by that one.
Yeah, if you had it running,
Yeah.
the browser app could potentially download some Java
Yeah.
as a class, source even,
All
and
kinds of
pass it
crazy
over.
things you could do.
Right, so you can do a lot of dynamic kind of risky things.
Things that may be bad, but may be
Maybe.
really cool.
But
they may
fun.
not be.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Huh,
The
very cool.
totally lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So,
beer.
so beer.
Second interview
Beer.
today.
Yeah,
All right. You get sponsorship from this, like having it on
I was
camera?
suggesting that we should.
Yeah.
We should. I mean, if we got a beer sponsor, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Scotch people out there.
Scotch.
wine.
Lagavulin, if you're watching.
Yeah, right.
So you built, as I think we started talking about, production apps. What are some of the good things that with Flex about building like actual real production apps, and what are some of the challenging things?
Okay, yeah. So the good things to me are that like building UIs with Flex is really rapid, and building on what the Flash player can do with the Flex framework is a great toolbox for doing those,
Yeah.
almost any app you want to build,
Yeah.
right? The downside, which is maybe not as much a criticism of Flex, but just the tool set available in the industry is like integrating things like skins and even to some extent services is tough. It's time consuming, and it's stuff that if you don't get defined up front clearly,
Right.
you end up spinning your wheels a lot along the way.
Huh. Interesting.
So,
So the
without
vision of dropping in a new skin after it's all built is still not.
well, no, I mean it's all possible, right? But
Yeah.
it's not drag and drop WYSIWYG,
Yeah.
right? So if the client we want this portion to be dynamic skin content that comes from a service, we better define that, you
Yeah,
know? Or we want you to start building the UI before our services team starts on development. okay, but let's get the schema set. Let's
Yeah,
make sure we know what
interesting.
technologies we're using.
Right.
So, because it is a rapid tool, a lot of people think like, well, then all these pieces can kind of like come together at the end. And
The always
that's a
myth of
risky thing.
software.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think it shows up more often than not on projects.
Huh, interesting. That's good to hear because one of the things we talk about with Flex is being able to kind of in parallel do your back end and your front end development. It allows you to iterate quickly on both of those.
Yeah.
But without like periodically trying to
Yeah,
actually
but that's-
attach those,
check
you
'em
can
in.
get, you have like a week left in your project and you're like, all right, let's try to fit these things together.
Exactly,
And all of
yeah.
a sudden, it's not fitting together.
It seems
you
like that's
kind of
where,
expected.
especially now that like there's a UI framework that's easier to use. That's where all the challenges are, is integration. No
It's
matter-
true, yeah.
It's like the idea of unit testing in a silo is great, but
Yeah.
all the interesting problems I encounter are integrating
Right,
things.
right, right.
So it doesn't surprise me that doing day-to-day stuff, you would identify that as the
Right.
place.
Yeah, I mean, the building components can be tricky too if they need to scale for data and
Sure.
performance, but I think Flex is easier than anything else I've used.
Is there things in the SDK that you were surprised at or were gotchas that you just wouldn't have expected?
Well, I mean, it's changed a bit. The discretion over protected and private is something that gets me a
Sure,
lot.
yeah.
So,
All of us Java developers are always like
yeah.
coming in.
Yeah, so
There was a recent campaign to do away with private, like completely in the SDK, and replace it with a custom namespace or something.
And I would be for that over more use of private.
Right.
I don't know if I'm totally for like getting rid of private, but there are a lot of things like data grid or a lot of custom or complex controls that if you try to subclass them, you can't actually get at everything.
Yeah,
Right.
it's totally painful.
And so then
Yeah.
you go to monkey patching it.
And you have to monkey patch it, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And I've heard the same thing about some classes being final that shouldn't have.
Yeah, I haven't run into that as much, but that does happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, we talked to Ryan about the example of date is
Right.
final.
That one's actually Flash Player. I guess there are actually some classes in the Flex framework that are actually final.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
So
date,
Flash Player we can't really change very easily. Can't change date.
True.
from not
Right.
being final
It's not
very
like Java
easily.
where it's an object. It's like a native kind of type.
Right. But like the ones in Flex, the actual Flex framework that are final, those probably can be changed.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
You said you got into Flex in 05?
Yeah, fall of 05.
How do you see the community over those? Because I know that's pretty early for the Flex stuff. How are people reacting now versus 3 or 4 years ago to you saying, hey, I'm a Java developer and I want to drag in this Adobe thing?
Yeah, I mean, James knows probably better than I do, but I think the community is growing substantially and pretty quick. We got a lot of open source projects out there. I mean, that shows something.
Definitely on that arc of starting to really mature, I think.
Right. I think the first conference I spoke at was 360 Flex in Seattle, maybe like about the next year later. So I've been doing Flex for about a year.
Cool.
And that was, well, shout out to 360 Flex.
Yeah,
They've been great about having me like every time since then. So
That's awesome.
John and Tom.
We'll put the link
They
in.
rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was like, at that time, Flex was still pretty tight. There were a lot of the engineers from Adobe that came up, and they still do come out. But the community was small and still, robust. And actually, I know of a lot of projects, open source projects, that started as a result of that conference, or the one before it.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
it's kind of
Flex
Opposite
MDI?
end of conference.
Yeah.
the window
Flex
managing
MDI, yeah.
thing, that started
We were just
there.
looking at that today.
Ann and Juan, excuse me, the beer, man. Juan and Andy's book.
Cheers.
Ann and Wandy. They started, on that track there.
Yeah.
So like, a lot of stuff started there, and I think since then,
It's just growing.
yeah, 360 and Indy, which is May, I think.
That's
It'll
the
be interesting.
opposite of what I usually think of as conference-driven development, where the vendor's trying to get the
That's
product
interesting.
ready
Yeah,
for the
right.
Yeah, no, they're
conference. And
rallying.
you guys
You're
came out of the conference and built things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool.
I mean,
I wonder how conferences could stimulate that better. I mean, it seems like it probably happened because it was a small conference.
we were next to each other, yeah.
Yeah,
it
and
sounds like the unconference kind of thing, where you're actually
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so
structured.
not at that one then, but in Atlanta, and I think as in San Jose, were the last two 360s.
Yeah.
Well, and at a Webmaniacs conference too. I host like a or a panel discussion for open source projects.
Oh, cool.
In Flex.
That's awesome.
You know, and really Adobe.
Yeah.
You know, because there's some CF guys that come in and talk. And those are really valuable, you know, just for meeting people.
Yeah.
But also it's like, we'll pose a few questions about open source in general, about Adobe platform stuff, and then
Yeah.
we'll take questions from the audience.
Yeah.
And there's some great discussions that come out of that.
That's cool.
Outside of that, a community that has accepted Flex, do you still interact much with Java developers, and
Yeah,
do
a
you
little.
see any difference in their impressions as it's caught on in the last couple of years, or is it
Yeah.
still?
I mean, you obviously know, you're a Java developer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I took a lot of hell. I'm just curious if that's a normal.
Right.
Like I was talking earlier today in '07, it was like kind of got laughed out of the room.
Right.
And,
There's,
and even now it seems a little late to get laughed at, but now it's like, oh yeah, we got to get on the train. And
Yeah, so I think there's, like, as Flex developers, the way that we might look at Silverlight in a biased way.
Yeah.
I think Java developers look at the whole tool set. A lot of Java developers look at the whole tool set that way. Like, it's not mature yet.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to use that syntax? Like, well, it's not Sun's, you know.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, I get
it is
Java.
another language. It is.
Yeah, it's a ECMA-based script. It's, you know, so yeah, I think there's some hesitancy because it's not Java and you can't do things like Java, which is in some ways fair. In some ways, it's like, well, just learn the new tool.
Yeah.
You know.
There's never been a good Java answer to the UI, so
Yeah, no, yeah.
giving me a different paradigm isn't exactly a problem
Yeah.
for me. But
So I don't see that as, and I've.
is that? Do you feel like that's softened, or is that?
A
Are you
little,
still
but-
getting that reaction?
Yeah, like I've mentored, like I've been on mentor gigs where it's like
Yeah.
help get the project off the ground, work with the Java
Boot camp
developers,
these guys.
and it's hard to change that line of thinking, especially if you've been doing that development for 5 or 10 years.
Sure.
Like,
Interesting.
no abstract classes. Like, I put var in front of it instead of the type.
Yeah.
You know, like these things that to us are trivial. Those of us that do
Yeah.
the development, but changing that mode of thinking is.
The irony to me in those particular cases is that Sun's answer at JavaFX is now a new programming language with
Right.
different syntax and
Right.
a totally different feel. So it's I think gives that incentive to finally
Right.
say, okay, I'm gonna have to learn something anyway.
Right.
Let's evaluate it on the merits. And
Right. Well, I think your buddy Bruce, I don't know if he coined this phrase, but people attribute it to him at least, about Flex being a domain-specific language
Right,
for
yeah.
UIs.
Yeah.
And I think he's right on the mark with that.
Yeah.
I like that one. I hadn't heard that before.
MXML specifically, like the declarative
Yeah.
MXML structure for defining.
Well, I think that's basically what they were trying to copy with JavaFX. Is,
Yeah,
oh,
but-
I do need this layer, and
Right.
yeah, whether or not they execute it,
It's V1.
we can
Flex
go on
is,
and on if you want.
Yeah.
But do I have any tools? But yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
We'll see. JavaFX is interesting.
No, it is, and I think we've talked a lot about with Silverlight's entrance to the market. Say what you want about it, it's pushed Adobe in ways that we just wouldn't have some of the things we have today. And I really hope that they're all really good because
Yeah.
I personally I like Flex and I use it to develop real applications, and
Right.
I'm often frustrated with its maturity level because
Yeah, I mean-
Java, we're kind of at the end of it, totally just getting to this almost legacy point. And
Right,
So
right.
it's weird to step back into a language that, oh, the testing tools aren't totally there.
Right.
Or this
But
or
it takes only a little bit of time and things like Fluent pop up. And,
exactly.
And a lot of open source, I think, is what's really helping.
Right.
Like a lot of the stuff that in the
absolutely.
Java world that really fixed the problems early on in Java were open source.
Yeah,
It's the
same
when it
arc,
came
I mean-
along and so I think that's beginning to happen. I think you mentioned this. You said, there's been this great stimulation of open source stuff in the Flex community. And that kind of shows that we're beginning to mature.
Yeah, I mean, we're back to your what are the downfalls of
Yeah.
or the weak points. I think that a lot of criticism is made fairly or unfairly about Adobe's open source reality.
Right.
Yeah.
And about just in general criticism of the SDK and the product and where it goes. Like there was a
Right.
group of 20 of us that were on this big
The
mission to get
yeah.
rid of the FX prefix.
right,
And really, like, for me, it wasn't a huge deal, but I could definitely see the arguments against it.
Yeah.
But Adobe did listen
Yeah.
to those arguments, and
Yeah.
they decided to take it out.
Well,
So
as much as I think it's fair on both sides to knock their open source, it's unbelievable how many things they're giving away now. So they've
Yeah.
listened to a large extent. That was actually the question I was going to ask earlier when the beer got to me. But was with your Merapi project, is the hope that continues to grow and flourish and become this great open source project, or is your guys' hope that Adobe hears the community cries to have this feature and allows it into the platform?
I think it's some of both. I mean, I think the reality is AIR is going to grow, and that's going to be good for all of us.
Yeah.
It's going to, like, they talked about at Max about mobile and all that. And I think a lot of the features that Merapi makes possible now that people are using it for will be part of AIR eventually. But I think the idea of bridging these two platforms also has value on its own. Like, all of the legacy and open source Java code that's out there is valuable. And if
Do you think they'll ever let us just call Java from AIR directly, or what?
I think, yeah, eventually. It seems like, so the answer is always, and maybe you can clarify, that it's not a security issue. It's not we don't want you to have execute. It's a maintenance product development thing. And I'm sure there are some people that think it is a security issue. But it's a feature that we're not ready to put in yet and maintain.
Right.
So that's reasonable to me.
It's reasonable.
That's a good answer.
And he knows a lot more.
That's a great answer. I'll stick with that.
No, but I think that's a reasonable answer. I mean,
I think it's reasonable to a point, but for me, like, talked a little about the impressions of Java developers.
Yeah.
The easy lead in for me was, and I honestly wish Sun would have just went on a campaign and said Flex is Java. I've got Java Data Services. I know it's a bit of a leap, but I've got Java Data Services. I have a Java IDE. I have a very easy leap for a Java developer, right?
that's true.
And from that perspective, I know it's not really Java on another runtime. And
Right.
I don't want to sound like just being an idiot, but so when I look at AIR, the first time I look at AIR, I'm like, well, that's nice. I have logic I don't want to duplicate in Flex, right? So I find that answer to be sufficient, yet kind of troublesome, because why can't I use why can't I have this tie-in I have in the browser?
Because they're a product company that
I
needs
know.
to make money.
And that is actually an easier answer for me to accept.
Yeah.
And even the portability challenges, I think, are easier for me to accept. But I think this is actually in context to where we were. The open source is, I love your guys' project because it says, okay, fair answer for the product company, but then the community comes in and says, here's your answer, right?
Right.
So that's actually the tie-in to...
And it's a great balance, right? It's great to be able to have that balance and kind of push each other, and I think that's how it really evolves. I think that's how Java evolved.
I think big time. And there's
Right.
things that in Java you just simply get from open source. You don't even
Right.
think twice,
Yeah.
So that's a reasonable answer, but...
Yeah, we'd still like to have all the features.
I would still like to have some more native features and some more...
Right.
So.
I'm curious if there's going to be any kind of cohesion in the open source Flex community. I know we have osflash.org.
Yeah.
But you look at like when Java was really taking off. There was Jakarta, the Jakarta Apache site,
Right.
and that became like
the
the center
consolidation.
for like where all things
Where you
open
went to
source
look.
So
Java
that
were.
is a question that came up, I think, at that last panel in San Jose.
interesting.
And I think Matt was there. Matt Choate.
Okay.
And the question was more not from Adobe, but from the community, like,
Right.
why aren't you doing this?
Right,
And
interesting.
he basically said, well, why aren't you doing it? Which I think is actually fair,
right.
right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's still young, and I think
Yeah.
the space is there for somebody to consolidate these efforts.
I wonder if Apache would ever be interested.
Yeah, I mean,
Apache has like the draconian processes. But
I've talked to them a little bit about Merapi, or like once or twice removed
Yeah.
about it. And it would be interesting. I mean, they do C and C++ stuff too.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe a Flex branch
That'd be
of
cool.
Apache.
Interesting.
It's such a nice thing as a developer because you had that confidence that,
Right. That seal of approval.
Yeah.
and, okay, I need something to
But then
have
just a
something
single
in it.
like point of entry, like if
Yeah.
I'm looking for an open source project, I'm probably going to find it on Jakarta.
Well, they give you that.
Right.
They give
With
you
the
that clear
exception of,
picture of we've stamped this production, or it's
Right.
in the incubator or whatever, and you.
But they have the governance around all those projects that's already defined,
Yeah.
and this is how you govern. They've got like the
Which could be a bad thing.
the
too.
Jakarta Commons, and a lot of this
It's
stuff already in
definitely-
place. It can be a bad thing for
but
sure.
but as a in consumer of open source,
Yeah.
it's often a challenge to get a clear picture of what the state of a project really
Right,
is.
right.
You're off looking at check-ins to see if it's really active and
Right.
have they maintained it over time. And
Yeah, which
Which may or may not even be required depending on what the API you're looking for. So.
Right, but it's definitely a fault of our project. If anybody's watching that's frustrated with that, I'm sorry. I think there was a forum post about Merapi is dead like a couple days ago, and I'm like, well, I got to put a new build out there.
Right. The trade-off of open source is the developer that thinks they're getting commercial products.
That's right.
So.
It's not commercial. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Be nice to your open source developers.
Right,
They're
right.
helping you. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you talked about what the community expert. What were you guys called? The group of 20 or so people that
I
were,
don't even know what the name. It's like the SDK committee or something.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
The community
This is
committee
over
or something like that.
We should give the context for you guys are talking about. This is over the whether or not they're going to prefix classes or not. Is that
was
right?
one issue. That
One
I think
issue,
that-
one issue.
that- so I'm curious. I think you guys did a great job of working with the Flex SDK team and. What else is kind of on track? What do you guys want to do? What are the
We're going to build Flex 5. So
awesome,
I mean,
lightweight,
No,
or
honestly,
like the mobile framework. Now, is this having to do with Flight?
no, it's Flex 5, the new SDK.
Okay, you guys are going to build it.
No, I'm just kidding. It was brought up though.
Okay.
Basically, like early on when we were discussing our frustrations, somebody said, "Well, it's open source. We could branch it and create our own."
Right, interesting.
I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work,
It's a
but-
big effort.
Yeah,
Right? So I don't know what the next.
But there are a lot
focus
of
is.
other open source kind of things that could become lighter weight versions of Flex. Like there's
Sure.
there's the Flight framework, there's
Right.
Degrapha, there's a lot of these pieces out there.
Right.
That seem like they could be combined.
OpenFlux.
Yeah, OpenFlux.
Yeah,
That's
right.
the one I was
Flight is
thinking of.
Joe Berkovitz?
No, Flight is Tyler and Jacob Wright, I think.
Oh, okay. So it's
Yeah.
not. For some reason, I thought Node Flight used Flight, which is his like
right,
startup
yeah.
thing.
What was the other parts of that dialogue in terms of the concerns from the community?
Well, I mean,
It's around Flex 4,
the
right?
private protected stuff. The,
Yeah.
The efficiency of some components. I mean, I think Doug. Sorry if I'm quoting you wrong, Doug. Said something about not being happy about some of the components being outsourced to India.
Oh,
And then
the
framework.
advanced data.
He has a whole blog on that, doesn't he?
Yeah. Oh, so I'm not.
Code.
It's out there.
He said it on Llvm's Flash, some video that
Okay.
was on when
Okay.
he was shooting guns and stuff. Much more exciting than drinking beer. I
We're
think.
jealous. We're going to
Yeah.
upstage it, though. We
I'll take the
promise.
beer. Right?
How about guns and beer?
That will get interesting.
Yeah. I'm out for that.
So,
I wanted to ask real quick,
Yeah.
did you feel like Adobe listened and they were...
Yeah, actually, Matt got in there and he's like part of the. It's a Google group thing. It's nothing fancy.
Yeah.
And he basically said, like I'm happy to be in here or be out, and or just listen and have you guys sound the issues to me. And he was very reasonable about it. And I think thanks Matt for listening, because that probably it did really preempt the FX issue being resolved.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really cool because I know they take a lot of flack, but
Yeah,
it
really.
does seem like they respond
they do. Right.
to the community
Right.
when they can.
Yeah.
I know there's vendor constraints like when to add Java and things like that, but
Right.
But yeah, that's cool.
yeah.
Sorry, James, go forward, please.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. There's been some concern around the governance model or lack thereof in the Flex SDK, and it almost seems like if we compare this to where Java was, the JCP came about because people in the community wanted to have more influence over the roadmap of the products. They wanted to have a more formal process, and it almost seems like with the community, what's it called, the community committee or whatever.
Yeah.
The community committee, we're
The
almost beginning to
FCP.
form some structure around how
Right.
the community influences the Flex SDK.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Klinkenbeard started the group up basically because I think he was the most enraged about the FX issue. Although Simeon Bateman made some pretty compelling arguments too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's like a bunch of us from all kinds of different top companies that do Flex work
Right.
are in that group, but it's still under 20 people, I think.
Right.
Or it's definitely under 30. I think it's under 20 though.
Well, is there a concern that you guys don't have a structured enough way to give feedback and
Right.
and
We're
define
working
the
on
direction?
that. I think we're working on that. We're going to use tools possibly like user voice to let the larger community funnel things through us.
Right.
And we're working on a way to like keep the numbers of the group manageable, but not
Right.
like.
Well, I guess what I'm asking, I guess, is that this is almost beginning to look like a community structured JCP, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It might be a great thing.
Right.
And maybe we need to start looking at it more like that. More
I don't know that
as
we've talked about that specifically, but it does feel like that. I mean,
like we're trying to create some structure and process around where this stuff is going.
right. I mean, in some ways, I think the group was formed in more of a spirit of rogue kind of we want our way, right?
Right.
Now let's be smart about getting some
Right,
traction
right,
on
right.
that. But like guys like Doug and Mike Labriola and like
Yeah.
these guys that are not shy about their opinions,
Yeah.
we're not shy about their opinions.
Yeah.
So now I think for us to all stay with it and be productive, we do need to have a real focus.
Right.
And like you said, maybe get a formal organization around it like a JCP.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Wow.
We haven't really set that
Pretty
up.
cool. Yeah. Interesting.
It makes a lot of sense that you would get there. It's interesting. I always think there's a parallel in the arcs between Flex and Java. And took till 2006
Yeah.
to get an open JDK. So
Yeah.
I guess in a lot of ways you guys are advanced, but that feedback mechanism and creating a healthy,
Right.
there should be a
Yeah.
friction, I think, between the vendor and the community.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
creating the way to make it efficient, and I think would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you don't want to get to the point like where the JCP is at, where it's pretty much just the spec, committees.
Yeah.
I don't think that's kind of too far on the other.
But I think those
side.
are designed to be criticized. Wherever you
Right.
guys end up, if this comes to be, hopefully it's doing enough that it's getting criticized for what it's doing and not doing. But sorry, a little JCP knock. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that actually sounds exciting. I hadn't even heard the notion in the Flex community.
Well, it was just
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks ago that
yeah,
it started.
yeah.
So that's kind of
Yeah.
But it's really in response to this one issue. But I wonder if it will be generalized.
Well, I think that's what we're hoping. If it lives,
Yeah.
that's yes. But I don't. Like honestly, I don't really want to be a part of writing a spec.
No,
You know,
and
I don't
maybe
want to see Adobe become a spec company either.
No. In fact, I'm glad that they didn't stick with the ECMAScript stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is that the official? I don't even know.
Is that I didn't know.
Is there an official announcement on that?
I knew you
What's
basically.
the official word on ECMAScript?
I don't even know.
I think
James,
the
speak for
official
Adobe.
word is that we're continuing to work with the ECMA committee,
Okay.
but it doesn't mean that our implementation won't deviate from the specifications.
Right, good.
It already has deviated
Good.
from the
Right,
specification.
exactly. We
Well,
won't
and I
do what
think
we've already done.
it seems
Or
like from
we will do.
Yeah.
The pat answers seem to have changed too from a marketing perspective. Is I don't hear anybody saying like it was ECMA Echo and Flash 9 came out. And
Right. Well,
that
that was
I didn't
because
hear that.
Yeah, and it's not Java,
Oh.
but it's something else.
we
We didn't just make it up.
Wasn't that the whole? We're going to claim the whole JavaScript community and say we have 2 million developers and
Yeah,
that kind of.
that's not going to work. It turns out
Yeah.
necessarily.
So let's just fix the language,
Right.
which I'm all for.
Right. Yeah, sorry, Apple and Google haven't turned over yet, but not that they're not using Flash and Flex, but
Yeah.
Now, have you guys seen? This is kind of going a different direction, but have you guys seen the new Eclipse project? Like, I don't know if it's Skunkworks or not, but it's a way to take Java and convert it to Swift bytecode.
huh?
Yeah.
Java?
Oh, yeah,
the
no, I
C
have
thing
heard
you
of
guys
that.
released?
Yeah. Okay. So
Similar paradigm, though?
Alchemy is the one we're doing to do C to LLVM to ActionScript bytecode.
Right.
But this one is actually doing Java direct to Flash bytecode. It's an Eclipse project. It's called like E4 or something.
Something like
Anyways,
that, yeah.
it's I think it's interesting. I think that there's this interesting perception that learning a new technology, the hardest part is learning a language, and I
Yeah.
disaby with that.
Yeah.
First,
Right.
I think that
Unless you don't ever
the-
learn new languages, then yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, that's true. But learning the APIs,
true.
learning how to actually
Right.
build applications and structure them is, I think, the more challenging pieces. But for Java developers, if I could take my existing language and APIs and run those on the Flash platform, I mean, this doesn't bode well for Adobe selling tools, right?
No, I mean
But-
it's an interesting
Yeah.
thing, but for me the biggest adjustment was thinking asynchronously and
Right.
things like that. So it's like
Which you still have to do in Swing and other UI
true,
paradigms. for
but
Java.
I'd written mostly stateless web applications,
Gotcha.
right? So it was like took a little while to get my head around that notion, and it seems like if I'm writing Java code, it's the behavior is still going to be the same, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So-
Alchemy and this project, to me, the lacking part is like you're using one technology and confined by another, right? Because you're confined by the Flash Player APIs.
You always have to
worst of both
choose
worlds.
the
Yeah.
lowest common denominator.
Lowest common denominator.
Well-
So if you want to be lazy and not learn another language, yeah, it's a good thing. But honestly, ActionScript and MXML are great languages for UI.
For the purpose, yeah,
Yeah.
the domain specific point. I hadn't heard that.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you get with Adobe is someone that understands tooling and
Right.
that level. They may not understand servers in Java, but
Well, and they understand that they need to use
yes,
technologies
yes.
that are
that wasn't a
understood.
knock at all. I think
Yeah.
they giving great integration points, but
right. And Cold Fusion is a great tool.
where
Yeah.
the other side is Java, and waiting on them to give you a UI framework, and they just
Right,
don't understand
right.
the paradigm.
The one place where I think that these actually become pretty useful is when I have libraries that are kind of just crunching numbers, or like somebody asked recently, like, there's no ActionScript library out there for IMAP. Like obviously Flash Player has a socket API. You could potentially write a socket
Right,
based IMAP library.
I think,
but one for Java, or probably multiple for Java, already exist. And if I could compile those directly down into a Swift or do
Right.
what Alchemy
Gotcha.
is doing,
Didn't
then-
MIMS do that already? Or was it SMTP? Anyway, but
Yeah, someone started on a project to do it,
Okay.
and they did SMTP first.
I see.
And IMAP is on the roadmap.
Is that really going to be realistic though? Because I remember like the big disclaimer when you guys did the C to ActionScript was you still only get the features obviously
We're
supported
back
by
to
the
that
Flash
lowest
player.
common denominator.
So
thing, yeah.
I mean, the way that Java does things, it seems.
Well, so the way that Alchemy does things is pretty
is Alchemy in
interesting.
the
So-
C to ActionScript? Okay.
So the interesting thing that Alchemy does, which could potentially also do it for Java, is that Alchemy does C to LLVM. So LLVM is this intermediary bytecode format,
Right.
and then does the LLVM to ActionScript. And so there's already stuff out there that can do Java to LLVM. So but the hardest part is implementing the native libraries for that runtime.
Yeah.
So everything that is
Gotcha.
being called natively in the runtime, you have to implement in ActionScript. So what a big part of Alchemy was implementing parts of the standard C library, so that all of your C code that's making standard C library calls can
Yeah,
actually
right.
execute on Flash Player. So Scott Peterson, the guy behind Alchemy, actually like built a threading technology and built the malloc and all that kind of stuff,
Interesting.
all the standard C library function calls on top of Flash Player, and it's like you have to be a complete brainiac
that got
guru to be able
rolled
to
into
do
10?
that. What?
Those APIs were rolled into 10 then?
No, well, the only thing that they added in a 10 to make the Alchemy stuff work was some changes to how byte array works, because he actually uses a byte array as his memory stack, right?
see. Makes
And then
sense.
he
Fascinating to me.
built malloc and stuff on top of byte array.
Right.
So there were some optimizations that they did in Flash Player 10 to make that perform really well.
Right.
Um,
Which is like vector and all these other things they needed to do anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
so, and actually, interestingly, side note on that, the MTask guys, they compared performance of array, vector, and then their own array built on byte array with the Alchemy optimizations, and the third one, their own
Really?
array built on byte array with the Alchemy optimizations were actually faster than vector and array.
Yeah, so I've heard that like the Alchemy code, C code in the Flash player can actually run more efficiently than ActionScript compiled
Yeah.
code.
Yeah.
Which seems odd. But
It seems
there's-
odd.
There's undocumented
really odd.
uses of
Yeah.
the APIs or something.
Yeah.
Well, there is one thing that I know of that Alchemy is taking advantage of in Flash Player 10 that the ActionScript C compiler, the ASC compiler, is not doing yet. And so they definitely need to take some of the stuff that they've learned from Alchemy and implement that in ASC. And
What a
that
great
will
win, though,
certainly-
right?
Yeah, oh,
Slam
absolutely,
dunk.
absolutely. So there's some of that work to be done for sure.
Well, so technically, it'll be interesting to see. Well, and I guess Adobe has maybe already done this a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see tools that go the other way, right? So like writing server-side code in ActionScript and
Yeah.
compiling it down to
Right, yeah.
Java bytecode.
Well, and that's the whole trend with the JVM anyway. So
Right.
getting ActionScript
Right.
in the
JRuby
game doesn't
and
seem
all that.
like too far fetched.
Which they showed
Yeah.
at Max.
Yeah, they did with Cold Fusion, I think.
Yeah, but it was just like a server-side ActionScript
Right,
was
right.
one of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sneaks or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more likely that I would take my jars and put them in Merapi and call them that way than really try and
Yeah.
run them through the Flash player. That seems like a very interesting and cool thing,
But it is 2 runtimes, right? So
it is, but
memory is cheap and people have it these days, so.
It's true, but it just seems scary to think I'm taking code
Yeah.
targeted for one
Yeah.
runtime, running in another, and expecting reliable behavior.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day that had used the Llvm search index, used a port of that to C#, and I guess it worked fine.
Interesting.
But that's a source code port.
yeah,
Right,
source
right,
code.
not a
Yeah,
binary.
well, that's
Yeah.
in terms of using the same source
Maybe
code.
we should
though.
be focusing more on source code porting tools rather than kind of.
I'll have to show you some stuff I was working on later.
Yeah? Okay.
That sounds a lot more like something I would consider using
Right.
on a production app than.
Well,
and this sounds totally interesting, and maybe there's some library where it works for, but in most cases, I would be very nervous.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like
Yeah.
but it's cool though, because you get the same point with like the C side where, okay, now we know how to implement array better and vector better. So
Right. It's good
it's not
R&D.
I don't see it as a bad activity at all, just as
Right.
a end user and developer.
One thing that you can't criticize too heavily is Adobe's R&D efforts.
True, very true.
The infinite zooming thing.
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah.
Lots of coolness.
Yeah. So let's talk about real quickly. One of the benefits of Silverlight is being able to write C# for client and server. And
True.
what do we think about that? Is that really, do we really want to be able to write same code on client and server? Or is it kind of nice just because, my developer skill sets are the same?
I think it's
and I can reuse them. But then again, do I even have the same developers building the UI as are building the back end?
You do in a traditional web app, is my personal experience.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that's a huge win for the IT organization because you do end up with a decoupled team. And we didn't want to leave you hanging with the excitement that you'd built up that whole time. There's a term for that, but I'm not going to use it. We finished the interview by asking, just for your general Flex tools and just what you're using, so that those out there, we all have our favorites. So if you give us a quick rant on those, and we'll have a nice little close. And
Cool. Yeah, so I typically use a Flex Builder plugin inside of Eclipse. So I have, Flex and Java development side by side. And I use Ant for a lot of things. I use Charles and/or Service Capture for testing service
what is
integration.
Charles?
It's the same as Service Capture.
Okay.
Network proxy.
Yeah, network proxy. Yep.
Okay.
I think the major cool one was the one Typinator,
Yeah.
which
The one I'm going to blog about.
right. Which is a macOS tool only that will stub any key phrase you type for another expanded phrase.
So it's an Eclipse plugin?
No, it's a macOS. I'll show you.
okay.
It's macOS level. It replaces for any text field in macOS.
Cool.
Yeah. So you could do it for emails, IMs.
And I think you said you were going to check out IntelliJ.
Right.
Which-
IntelliJ has
with
been
Flex support.
bringing out Flex support.
Yeah.
Looks pretty cool. Fluent is a great testing open source project. Is that it?
I think so.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now we just needed to make sure we didn't totally be hanging. But thanks for coming and doing the podcast. Next
right.
time we'll have
Thanks,
the
Adam.
scotch.
Cheers. Yeah.
Yep.
Scotch.
Sounds good. Thanks.